Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Su. I am from the Center for Livable Cities, and I'll be the moderator for today's lecture, Building and Cooling Singapore in an Era of Climate Change. As global temperatures rise, climate change impacts and resilience strategies are of increasing concern to Singapore. Today, we will explore how the Cooling Singapore research agenda interfaces with the nation's development plans and highlight the goals of mitigating the urban heat island effect and improving outdoor thermal comfort. The format for today's lecture will start off with a talk about ongoing Cooling Singapore research efforts, followed by a panel discussion, which I'll moderate, and we will also incorporate question and answer segments with the audience. Today, we're honored to have with us 5 panelists working in this field. Dr. Gerhard Schmitt is a professor of information architecture at ETH Zurich and founding director of the Singapore-ETH Center. Among his many roles, he currently leads the Cooling Singapore project and its international team of researchers. Ms. Adele Tan is Group Director of Strategic Planning at URA, responsible for long-term land use planning for Singapore, including developing a master plan for our underground spaces. Dr. Winston Chow is Associate Professor of Humanities at the Singapore Management University. He's a principal investigator for the Cooling Singapore initiative and was recently selected by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, to be a lead author for the 6th Assessment Report's chapter on cities. Ms. Yan Yan comes to us from the public health sector. She is the Director of Hospital and Operations Planning for the Woodlands Health Campus, where she was responsible for overall hospital and campus planning, as well as improving operations through service redesign and innovation. And Mr. Michael Leong, Director at SA Architects, leads teams in design and project management. He has stewarded a wide spectrum of projects, including integrated developments, transportation, and master plans, as well as commercial, healthcare, high-rise residential, and institutional developments. And I'm very glad that everyone's able to join us here at URA. Michael actually is an alumnus, formerly worked at URA as well, so I guess it's great that we're all meeting here today. So we're about to dive into a discussion with our array of panelists. First, though, I'd like to invite Dr. Gerhard Schmitt of the Singapore-ETH Center to give us the opening remarks for today's event.
Thank you, Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, for the perfect introduction. And I'm very honored to be here and to speak about the Cooling Singapore initiative. And I'm so happy to see so many of you who are already participating. This is a project that started about 2 years ago, fixed, and about 5 years ago, intellectually and virtually. And first of all, I want to thank all of these people that were involved in the first phase of it. And you can see them here. There are many, many people. They're all from different climate zones and different backgrounds and different cultures. And it's a growing team, and we are most happy that they work with us. I want to start with some alarming slides, like everybody does. This morning you probably heard in the news that more than 9 out of 10 Singaporeans are worried about climate change, and you have certainly seen also headlines like this from the United Nations and Channel News Asia, that many million jobs are threatened directly by climate change, but nobody knows exactly how and why. The good thing is to be in Singapore, we can do something about it, and this is why I'm very hopeful. When we look at these very threatening slides like this one here, the global risk of deadly heat, you can see over the world where in the next years it's expected that temperatures are really going to rise massively, and everything that is red and yellow are the places that will be hit, and of course Singapore is right in the middle of it. On the other hand, if we don't do anything, and that's why it's so good to have people like Winston here with us, if we don't do anything, if we do something, then we can shift our Singapore situation from what is called the deadly threshold from the right to the left. And this deadly threshold describes if the temperature goes up and if the humidity goes up, where and how many days there will be in the year in 2050 on the increased mortality rate. And that's, of course, where we don't want to be. And this is where the Cooling Singapore project is working on. It has other consequences, of course, on all the illnesses that are getting spread if the temperatures are going to rise, that have sudden downpours of rain, which you have experienced in Singapore and other places in recent years, increasingly, and of course the big topic of rising sea levels that will hit Singapore directly. But again, there are ways to circumvent it or do something against it, both in terms of preventing it or also fighting against it locally. Next point is on Singapore as an urban heat island. Singapore is a beautiful island for all of us who come here from the outside, but it's also very hot, as we all feel and you also feel. Winston Chow will later go more detailed on the difference between climate change, climate warming, and the urban heat island, but these are two different things. I just want to say they are two different things, but they interact. So climate change is changing the climate and the temperature also globally, and the urban heat island, this is something that we can do something about directly here in Singapore. We have made one big presentation that we worked a long time on. It's an animation, many of you have seen it, but it shows you during the course of one day, a typical day, it was in 2016, how the urban heat island is spreading and shrinking throughout the day. And everything that you will see that is red is above the temperature that it should be and is above the temperature that the surrounding countryside has, or also the center part of Singapore has. And on the top left, you will see the time ticking. So let's have a look at this. Here it starts at 0 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, and you can see these areas where maybe you are living or close to working. It's now 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, then everybody's starting to drive their cars to work. That ejects a lot of heat into the urban system. Then there come some breezes from the sea, fortunately, and you can see it's getting cool. That's how it should be, relatively. But already at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, these heat islands start to spread again throughout the island. And when it gets 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, all people are driving home, and trucks and buses and all are on the road, it spreads again. And we can see even at night, and especially at night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or midnight, this is a phenomenon. And all of us who try to sleep at night, try to open the window at night, depending where you live, you can feel that directly. And it is up to 7 degrees. There are two reasons for that, the local warming. One of them, of course, is the anthropogenic heat, as we call it, the direct input from people with machines, with cars, and all of this. And here, just a very small animation that shows that. This is now only showing the input from the cars. You see it again at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then again in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. You can see where the cars are driving and how much heat they are releasing. Of course, we have to convert heat into temperature, and all of these things very complicated. But from this example, you can see one of our very important and complex instruments. And this is the so-called Sankey diagram here, which shows on the left all the energy coming into the country and shows on the right where this energy is being used. So for example, everything that's happening on the road is shown in this red circle, and we can see it in comparison to the rail, to the residential, to the commercial and other buildings, and to the industry on top. This is, so to say, the best case, but if we look how the electricity is generated, if we account that as well, then we get a slightly different picture. Excuse me, going back too fast. We're getting a slightly different picture. The other way to look at the urban heat island, in fact, it's not only the things that we actively, by driving cars and so on, but it can also be things that we build. So the roads, the buildings, and the very strong structures, they make a difference. And we cannot really calculate this very precisely yet. Soon we will. But we have indicators for that we have hotspots in Singapore, and we can try to reason how this is coming about. So, for example, the CBD is a high surface temperature on top of the roofs, or the places where the goods are being exchanged, or the industry places. So we have the hot spots, and we also have cold spots, like in the center of Singapore. And then we can go deeper with these images and look also not only at Singapore, but the places around, and that shows the urban development that we see in the north, and also in Batam in the south, that these are really very hot temperatures already. And the surrounding countryside, for example, also in Bintan, you can see very cool places. And if there were no buildings and nothing in Singapore, probably that's how it would be now. So this gives us the opportunity to calculate from as it should be or could be to what it is. And then we can look in specific areas such as the airport or, for example, in Jurong Island, we can see how it's developing over time. And this is all data we can get from satellites. So putting the two together, this sounds all very terrible, but we want to ask, where would you want to be in let's say, 2030 or 2050? And this is when Singapore comes in, that we can do something about it. Because here we want to have, of course, Singapore as the most livable city. That means we want to have high thermal comfort. This is very important, high thermal outdoor comfort. We want to have clean air, we want to have clean industry, and we want to have designs from URA and others that enable that. This is an example from the Jurong Lake District. And also, we want, of course, less noise. We want to have renewable energies. We want to have circular economy, all these things that help us to improve the livability of Singapore, among other things. The next question is, of course, how can science help? Because we are a consortium of scientists and architects, engineers, planners, sociologists, and so on. How can we help? We can help in defining the outdoor thermal comfort, how to measure it. We can try to define it exactly, that we know what we are looking for, how we make it more comfortable for you to be outside and outdoors. And then we can also go to look into specific areas of Singapore. For example, in HDBs, we can make maps, we can make simulations, how we can define where the outdoor thermal comfort is high and where it is not, and where you could place your playgrounds and where you shouldn't. So all of these things are implemented already partially, and we can not only simulate Singapore on a very high level, broad level like the whole island, but we can go down already almost to the level of HDBs. We also looked into people's heat mitigation preferences, because everybody has different ideas. And we asked them, what do you think you would do most or most likely? What do you prefer? And people gave very clear answer: green facade, renewable energy, and so on. Then we asked them, where you put your tax money if you could decide that. And you can see it's a very wide spread, but electric buses, for example, or green streets are very high on the list. And finally, where would you do that on your neighborhood? And they gave answers exactly, precisely. We would propose to do it here, or here, or here, or here. So this was a very productive exercise. Then we went one step further and asked a very difficult question, and that is, would you put your money there? What is your willingness to pay to do that, to reduce the urban heat island effect, for example? And those answers, they were given by more than 1,800 Singaporeans, and you can see the average people, when they saw what you just saw, their willingness to pay increased a lot, because they saw the relation between Singapore, the parts why the urban heat island effect is coming, where it's coming from, and their willingness to pay. But there are big difference, for example, between people who are alone or who are young. The young people, they are much more willing to pay, and if they have families or even children, their willingness to pay is increasing tremendously. So these are very, very interesting results we got from this first service, and of course we're working on this in the future. We made quite a number of climate responsive design guidelines as the first shot. You might have seen them. You can download them from our website. They're all available. And we can also then zoom into particular areas where we want to study these design guidelines. Here, this is a part of CBD, of course, where we do a theoretical site layout, and we put in, and we want to try to figure out what would be outdoor thermal comfort if we had this type of block height and block situation and block details, and we can get a very precise answer after many, many simulations, so we know which blocks are better or less good to do in this situation. Finally, Kevin mentioned Cooling Singapore 2.0. We're moving towards this goal because there are many things we know now, but many more things we do not know. And we are extremely thankful for all the people from the universities and from the agencies that are working. We're working in a big group together on different levels, trying to define what do we need for Cooling Singapore 2.0. There are two things I just want to say. You might hear these again in the future. One is called the DUCT. Sounds easy, but it's really a digital urban climate twin. We have to build an urban climate twin for all of Singapore. There are beautiful projects that are ongoing already, Virtual Singapore, all these kind of things, that we can connect with the climate data to make a digital climate twin. We need that because we need to simulate all of Singapore. And this digital urban climate twin will enable to make much more precise predictions of these things we said. We also want to build something for the people and for the government, like an urban climate design and management tool. And it's like a thermometer. When we say we want to respect the nature, we want to respect the cost, we want to respect the health of the people and the ecology, then by turning it down, we have to consider all these things: material, energy, vegetation, shading, transport, urban geometry, weather features, and it has to be all one integrated system, and we're working on that. This system, of course, also needs people, and this is the second thing to remember. This would be the urban climate design and management system, an extension to urban climate design. And in this one, we would take Singapore as it is today. We would try to see how the master plans for the future, what kind of effect they would have on the actual heat island effect of Singapore. Then we would discuss that with urban planners and in a big group, and they would say, this is not good, this is working, but we would be able to revisit then the master plan or other plans for the future, and it becomes a circular process going round and round until they have found one very good explanation and one good implementation example. So then it would be implemented and, of course, continuously monitored and improved. So this is something what we envision for 5-10 years down the road when we have the system and all of the Singapore agencies, universities are working together to achieve that. So with that little outlook, thank you very much. And this is our goal, beautiful Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you for the opening remarks, Gerhard. I guess could we invite the rest of the panelists to all take your seats at the front? So as a quick reminder, the format for today's lecture will start off with a panel discussion now. In between questions to the panelists, we will also be addressing some of the questions submitted by audience members through Pigeonhole Live. So it's a simple website where you can submit questions to the speakers and vote on the ones that interest you most. If you have a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop with you, just launch your internet browser and go to pigeonhole.at, that website, and the event passcode is CoolingSG. If you have any questions throughout the presentations and the discussion, feel free to submit them through this website and vote for the questions you're most keen for the speakers to address. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So let's begin with Gerhard. That was a very wide-ranging set of research studies that you introduced, everything from built environment to social psychology. And based on Cooling Singapore's work so far, are there perhaps some general principles that we need to be aware of or specific measures that seem most promising that maybe some of the practitioners could experiment with? For example, architects and campus planners like Yan Yan and Michael here?
Sure, thank you for the question. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you for this question. This, of course, everybody wants to know that, and it cannot give a one-fits-all answer. But definitely, there's a very good match between what we have found out in research, that, of course, green is good, and shaded streets, shaded places, plazas, and so on is good. And unfortunately, it also matches with what Singapore has done in the past already, and also what in our service with people they directly prefer. So this is an easy to implement thing. And also beyond all the benefits of shading, the positive aspects of trees and plants in terms of CO2 is of course very, very important. And then there are other things that are directly concerning constructions and planning. And in terms of planning, the link with transportation is very important. And here we have found very strong possibilities by modeling different models for transportation. And of course, the car light movement that has been started already by the government is a very good starting point, and continuing on that will be great. Singapore is one of the countries that has the lowest densities of private cars. So it is in a very comfortable position to start with. Switzerland, for example, has 10 times, almost 10 times as many cars per 1,000 people than here. And so this is a very good way to proceed. So the cars will then link other transportation modes. And finally, also in terms of materials in buildings, BCA, HDB, all of them have done fantastic research for many, many years on that. Maybe there a new development that is coming on very strong is the active production of electricity in the time when you need it in the building to use it directly there. And this way one can start to reuse or not use as much electricity from the power plants as we do now. But these are just a few points. We have 86 measurements, so you find them all in the book.
Thanks. Then Michael, from the architect's perspective, how would you respond to some of the things Gerhard has brought up?
Yeah, I think some of those examples that Gerhard has mentioned are really things that we are trying. But I would say that they are very much in the almost at the infant stage. What I was really struck by was the slide that you show, which surveyed people how willing they are, to pay for cooling down Singapore. I think the next group of people that you should ask that question to are developers. So, it is a very real issue that we deal with almost every day. Whenever we are asked to provide green features into projects, the almost next immediate question that comes along is, so how much more does it cost? So we do always have to find creative ways that is out of the box to demonstrate that it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to cost you 5–10% more. If you do things much earlier on in the stage of the project, we are actually able to set in a lot of plans that allow us to actually become green in a much lower cost than what it would have been if we were just to throw in a lot of active measures. So I think that's one of the key issues that we have to tackle with. The other part of it is cultural. So I really like the slides that you show about the impact and how much damage is going to be in the year 2050. So I have kids who are going to be my age in the year 2050. So I start thinking about things like that, and they're going to be suffering 5 times, 10 times more than what I'm suffering now just walking outside. So how do we get that message across to people and educate them and come from a more holistic point of view? I think that's really the root of the issue that we are facing today. Solutions are easier part of it, and I think it's really the mindset change and the cultural change.
Great, it sounds like there's quite some alignment then between these two perspectives. Turning to Winston, from your point of view as a climate scientist, there might be some misconceptions or misunderstandings about urban heat island and its connection to climate change and other issues. So what are some of the key things that you feel people have to understand?
Thanks, Kevin. Gerhard actually did a fantastic job in clearing some of the misconceptions, so thank you for doing that. Made my job easier. I will touch on 3 misconceptions that I've come across very often when talking about either the heat island or thermal discomfort with climate change and global warming. First is that people tend to have that belief that the heat island equals to global warming or climate change. That's not the case. They have different causes. Gerhard has pointed out that the origins of the heat island are more local. They result from urbanization through increased building mass, more road surfaces, more impervious surfaces, less greenery, as well as that important anthropogenic emissions element. Whereas climate change or global warming is more from larger scale, external, out of Singapore emissions from greenhouse gases that trap in radiation from in the atmosphere and keep it within the Earth's surface or within the bottom layer of the Earth's atmosphere. That is not to say that they are 2 distinct entities. We know that the risks or the impacts from climate change exacerbates or makes worse the impacts from the heat island. The heat island is best seen at night for air temperatures. It makes things uncomfortable. During heat waves, it also makes your nighttime temperatures even worse. Now, if you have air conditioning, like most of us have in Singapore, we can adapt to that. If you're in Southern Europe, for instance, like these past few months where they have been experiencing a heat wave and they are in urban areas, it's a double whammy that makes things extremely uncomfortable and sometimes even life-threatening. So that's the first misconception. Second would be that when people refer to the heat island, there's that assumption that there's only one type of heat island. And I'm glad that Gerhard pointed out that there's not just the air temperature heat island, in which we measure it using thermometers or stations. We also look at the surface heat island, which was present in those sets of images that looked at land surface temperatures. They have different causes, they have different dynamics. For instance, the land surface temperatures, the surface heat island from land surface temperatures are at their maximum during the daytime, during noon hours, whereas for air temperatures, it's best seen at night. Often, depending on where you are, if you're in Orchard Road, in the commercial area, it's around midnight. If you're in residential areas, it's closer towards the sunrise. So understanding that there are different sorts of heat islands is critical to trying to adapt to reduce their impact, or to eliminate most of the negative or the bad things that arise from that. The third misconception that I've come across often, and I think in the course of working in Cooling Singapore, it's also a very common misconception, is that, hey, if we can do X, Y, Z, can we totally eliminate the heat island? Unfortunately, that's not the case, because as long as you have a city, as long as you have a settlement, you will have warmer urban temperatures. You can't get away from that because of the basis of urbanization. Now, that is not to say that we can't do anything. And in the first misconception, I said that climate change exacerbates the risks from heat islands. How we solve, or how we find solutions to adapt to the heat island also can have the benefit of trying to reduce emissions for climate change. So while you have a double whammy in terms of impacts from heat waves and heat islands, the things that we can do to reduce the heat island can also lead to benefits in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing Singapore's emissions profile for climate change. What I mean from this is, well, Gerhard can probably talk about it more. You can look at the 86 methods that we've done in Cooling Singapore that we put online. And also governmental actions, which my fellow panelists will be more than happy, I don't want to hog the mic, more than happy to discuss. But the other thing of note is that even individual actions or actions by businesses, there's a fair amount of landscape architects in the audience here. If you are conscious of green infrastructure, you can not only reduce the heat island locally, but you can also help to reduce carbon emissions, make the land surface more permeable, have a potential carbon sink in your vegetation to reduce Singapore's greenhouse gas profile. So while there is that double whammy, there's also the potential for benefit if you address both the heat island, and at the same time you can address your global warming or climate change impacts.
Thanks, Winston. That makes the issue really clear. So if we zoom then from kind of these larger questions to a specific one, I think Yan Yan and Michael, you're practitioners working in campus design issues. So how have some of the things that Gerhard and Winston brought up affected your work? So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about the Woodlands Health Campus and how you've linked buildings with the outdoors here in Singapore's climate.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll just give a quick introduction about the Woodlands Health Campus. I think what has been shared just now resonates a lot with me. At the very beginning of the campus project, we know we are going to create a heat island. Yeah, if you can click to the next slide. What you see on the left, that was the land that was given to us back in 2013, 2014. It's completely unblocked. There's not even a single tree. It's just an empty grass patch. And we know we are going to put 1,800 beds onto this, empty plot of land and creating a heat island. So what can we do? I think we're also very fortunate to actually have Michael with us to talk about there are things that you could do possibly that at the beginning of the project so that it won't become too expensive to implement all these sustainability measures. A little bit more about the campus. This is pretty unusual in Singapore. This is the first fully integrated campus. So we do have the usual accident and emergency, the acute hospital, the community hospital for rehabilitation. We also have a hospice for end-of-life patients, as well as a long-term care component, a nursing home, and a senior care center. So all in one. So the focus was a lot about integration. Beyond the clinical integration, looking at the entire care continuum from wellness all the way to end of life, we also thought that it is a great opportunity for us to look at how do we integrate with the adjacent park. So when URA zoned this site, they were actually pretty, I think it was pretty strategic. We were given a site of 7.6 hectare, and right next to us is about 1.5 hectare of parkland. So at the onset, we thought that, okay, there were quite a number of integration projects done before we talk about Republic Polytechnic. We went to see how Khoo Teck Puat integrate with the pond, and we thought we could actually do something similar. So later on, Michael will talk about how we actually strategically work with URA and parks and try to make this campus a little bit more humanistic, a little bit more healing, and beyond the current hospital confine. So some of the design principles. So this is also, this picture of the very colorful Macau. When we visit the sites, we realized that this is really the recreational backyard of people who are actually living around. The schools regularly brought students go there to do jogging. On the weekends, nearby residents would just attempt to climb up the hill. They train their birds there. So one of the thought of planning the campus, in addition to all the clinical parameters, is really about how do we give back to the community, enriching their life. And I highlighted here these 3 key design principles that's essential to a health campus. Healing environment. We do have a very special profile of clients that we serve. How do we make the environment healing and conducive for them? Engaging community. Giving back to the community, not in terms of just recreational, but also encourage them to adopt an active and health promoting lifestyle. Can hospital actually anchor the community by promoting health and wellness? Yeah, so that was also some of the thoughts that we have in planning.
Every time I see this picture, it actually reminds me of an experience that I had. When we first started doing this project, I went on the site visit, and like what Yin said, there's already a group of people who use this site quite regularly. So there are regulars who come every morning and they jog around and all that. So I was walking up this slope at the back there with an old uncle, and I think it's maybe about 70 years old or something, just climbing up the slope. And so I caught up with him, and I want to break the good news to him, say that, hey, do you know that we're going to build a big hospital here? And in full anticipation that he'll be so excited, he looked at me and then he was so aghast and said that, what, you're going to take this away from me? And he was sort of like semi-traumatized by it, and I was also equally traumatized and by his reaction, because this is totally unexpected, and I thought he would actually welcome it very much. And I realized that there's really a very strong sense of community that is really built up in this area. Whenever we go in to build something, we are also taking away something from people who already use that piece of land. So what that trauma actually translated to, this is where the site is. So they will actually go around here, and some of them will cross over to the park connector within Mandai to use that space over here. So having the benefit of being from URA before, I know that the master plan is something that can be adjusted. All right, so we had this master plan. I was told no media is here, so I we had this master plan originally, and of course, anything is not cast in stone. At that point of time, we were told that you're going to have a park 1.49 hectares next to you. So we started thinking, is there a way that we can have a better win-win solution? Instead of saying that, look, the hospital is here, the park is here, let's just draw a straight line down in between the two of them and say that this is your park and this is my hospital. So not necessarily the case, right? So actually, we were very fortunate to have URA working with us very closely on that, and to look at what are the other ways that we can do in order to have both sides benefit from this approach. So what in the end happened was an interlocking form between the hospital land and the park land. So the area that is safeguarded from both sides for the healthcare land and the park land remains the same. So nobody loses a square inch of land. But what we are able to do is to have the park that is coming into the campus and allow the buildings and the different villages within the campus to enjoy the park, even though they are actually in a separate piece of land, so to speak. So that was actually the very first move that we were able to make, and that allowed us to achieve quite a lot of things. Conceptually, what we were able to do is to bring this idea of a hill slope. So the land that is safeguarded for the park is on the hill. It goes up about maybe 20 meters. And we brought that concept of a hill park coming down and then climbing up this campus building, almost like mirroring what we have on the hill park into the campus, almost like an artificial man-made park. Also, what was very fortunate was M Parks was experimenting with the first healing garden over here, and that fits actually exactly hand in glove into what we are trying to do. So you have the public coming to use the park, and at the same time, it just flows seamlessly into the campus, even though they are not a patient. So I think that's really what we wanted to achieve at the end of the day. The idea of a rainforest, being these 4 layers that has different lives, that allow us to create different ideas to accommodate different types of features. So if you look at a cross-sectional view of the campus here, so this is really where the M Parks land is. So it slides into the center of the campus. So that allows us to create a lot of rain gardens, takes away a lot of the heat island effect. So this medical center, and you have a building right next to it, which is the nursing home. So these buildings would have been looking at a blank, hard, reflecting kind of a ground. But because the park now comes into this space, it actually absorbs a lot of the heat that would have been reflected into the windows and the wards, which are naturally ventilated. So they would have gained a lot of radiation heat compared to what is going to happen now. So this water gets collected, we reuse them for irrigation. So we bring in some pipes, because there's quite a lot of deep basement, so some pipes will bring in daylight, and that cuts down on the need for natural lighting. So some of the very basic things that we've done is just looking at simple things that HDB has been doing for decades, which is orientation. So orientation of these blocks, they are absolutely north-south. So 80% of our work is going to be naturally ventilated. So north-south orientation becomes very important, so that the short ends of the building, which is what we call the gable ends, these are the only surfaces that face the eastern sun and the western sun. So everybody gets very good ventilation because of the orientation too. So as you can see, these are the various gardens that we have also incorporated to the top of the campus, allowing it to be really also bringing down heat gain internally. So cutting across, so you now see this park coming into the, in between these 2 buildings. The nursing home gets a wind screen and an acoustic screen, because we do have some noise that comes in from here, but that also becomes an internal courtyard that the residents can come out and use, even though it is just right next to a highway. So one of the features that we will have in this campus is that there is no roads on the ground level whatsoever. As soon as the cars come into the campus, they dive down into the basement, and we don't see them until they come out from the basement at all. So all roads are underground. That helps to prevent any roads from heating up under the hot sun. Everything is actually sheltered, and you get a really park-like ground level. So you really do not know whether you're in the campus or you're in the park, because there's no road, there's no cars whatsoever within the campus on level 1. Yep, so I think that's a quick overview.
Yeah, thank you. So you've really bridged some of these micro-planning changes and vegetation strategies to think about urban heat island, in addition to the different activities that take place in your developments. Turning to Adele then, from the planning side of things, URA must deal with both larger macro issues from the strategic planning perspective, and also specific urban design elements at the building or block level, and you also coordinate with other agencies too. So can you tell us about the efforts that government has taken to address outdoor thermal comfort and urban heat island issues?
Sure. So URA's interest on urban heat island is as what Gerhard said. I think we're interested in making sure that Singapore has a very good quality of life now and in the future. And what people experience in terms of the temperature outside will be part of that. How URA is involved, or where we can influence, is through urban planning, through some of these broader island-wide strategies, as well as even at the urban geometry level. And then I'll also share a little bit about what government as a whole, the other agencies within government are also thinking about. But I thought, just to recap again, what are the contributing factors to urban heat island. So you've got things that store heat from the sun, right? So unlike undeveloped areas, in urban areas, you've cleared the vegetation in many cases, and you've got buildings instead. And these buildings store the heat and then radiate it back. So that's what makes cities hotter. You've got anthropogenic heat, so that's from like vehicles or air conditioning, exhaust, or industrial activities. I guess even ourselves just moving around, breathing out air in some way is an anthropogenic heat source. And then you've got the urban geometry itself, which can trap heat if you don't think about it. So you've got these other aspects which take heat from sun, store it, generate heat, and then you've got urban geometry, which, if you don't think about it, will keep all that heat within the city, right? So that's one way to think how to analyze the urban heat island effect. So for URA, we look at it at various angles, as briefly touched on by Gerhard. Things like transport policy would have a major impact. How you plan the city and organize it so that we promote public transport, we promote mass transit, which is more efficient. That, at a very macro level, will help in how much heat we generate. Where and how we plan our greenery or our policies on parks and greenery in Singapore is also a major element to that. And that's where, by accident or otherwise, so when Singapore started planning and trying to be a garden city and now a city in a garden, I don't think we were consciously thinking about urban heat island effect at that point in time, right? But happily, we have built kind of a foundation on that, and now it looks like that is really the way to go forward. Greenery will be an important strategy as we move forward in trying to make sure that our city stays comfortable as possible. Yeah. So maybe specifically on urban geometry and urban planning. So Michael and Yan Yan have shared, at a development level, after we've given a parcel, they can do certain things with the building design and so on. But where URA from a master planning angle, or even say HDB or JTC as master planners, can help mitigate is at the urban planning stage. So how we lay out the roads, how we lay out the parcels, how we determine which buildings are high or low, that at a very upstream level can help to mitigate the UHI effect. Key consideration is making sure that the airflows are not impeded too much, right? So there's good, if you're near waterfront areas or near the sea, we don't want to have buildings that block that flow. We want to try to orientate buildings and streets or drains and parks, breezeways essentially, so that you can facilitate that flow as much as possible. In terms of parcellation, we try to make sure that the parcels are such that as far as possible, buildings can be oriented to use passive design so that they're not facing the east-west sun in Singapore's context. And then also to try to encourage or enable shading within the city. So these are some of the urban geometry interventions that we are thinking about. We do need tools to think about, to really model this in more detail, because some of these effects interact in not so simple ways. So for example, HDB has developed this integrated environment modeler that helps them to take in aspects such as wind flow, solar irradiation, and so on when they design their HDB districts. So we're looking to apply these sorts of concepts at various scales. So there's the district level for, say, a HDB town or area. There's also even more broadly at an island-wide level. So where should we place parks,
or major drains or breezeways, so that at an island-wide level we try to facilitate this good urban geometry. So that's a little bit more detail on the urban geometry side. Beyond that, other agencies, we work together agencies on looking at strategies to mitigate urban heat island. Some of these aspects include urban greenery. So we work closely with parks on this. How do you plan your parks, or how do you use urban greenery, say on buildings, even built-up areas, to try to cool the environment down and provide shade. Cool materials is another promising area that we're looking at. Unfortunately, right now it's still more costly than normal materials. So the question is how to bring the cost down and make it more effective so that we have a more cost-effective product overall. And then we also look at how to manage the anthropogenic heat. So key aspect of that is working on energy efficiency at all levels. So for manufacturing processes, for household products, as well as building efficiency. Some aspects that we're looking at is also, for example, the heat emissions from air conditioning or from transport. Are there ways to reduce that, either through more efficient ways of doing it or just completely rethinking how we think about cooling buildings using, say, passive methods instead? So overall, lots of people within government are thinking about this. We're not doing it on our own. We're also talking to researchers and the industry, experts like yourself as well. In some areas, there's still some knowledge gaps. So we're working on some research efforts as well to try to improve our understanding and figure out what's the best way forward for this. Yeah, and maybe just a final point that UHI, the urban heat island effect, and how to deal with it can sometimes may not be so straightforward. There's some interactions between different strategies that we have to think about, or even strategies with other environmental interactions with other environmental strategies that we're thinking about. So some examples would be, well, in general, we think greenery is a great way to cool down the environment, provide shading, the evapotranspiration, all that effects can provide some cooling. But we also found out that if you plant lots of trees, it does affect your wind flow in the city. It also increases the humidity because the trees let out more water and so on. So people may feel more uncomfortable because it's more humid. So where then is the balance between cooling and humidity, between cooling and these effects on wind? So these are some things we are thinking about and studying further. Another interesting interaction that we're interested to look at is we are putting out more solar panels for renewable energy, for clean renewable energy. So what is the impact of that on urban heat island? Is it good or bad? And there's some studies out there done in other cities. It's a little bit mixed right now. Some people are very sure that it's a positive effect overall. Some people are not so sure. So if anybody has views, let us know. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I think at this moment we'll turn to some of the audience questions that folks have been voting on Pigeonhole. This first one, I think kind of combining two questions that are asking something similar. We'll direct this one to Gerhard. It says, waste heat from air conditioning is a significant contributor to this problem. And then another person says, the process of cooling creates heat and exacerbates UHI, yet we cannot live without it, so we'll continually need more and more cooling. I guess the question here is there research to mitigate, redirect, or recycle the waste heat that's coming out of our buildings? And I guess also, if we think about this, it's not just on a XY direction, also thinking about vertically, where is the hot air coming out of the buildings? Is that something that we can think about, and what kind of research is there to address that?
Wow, this is a loaded question, but it's very direct, and therefore we have also done study in this and other, I'm sure BCA and others too. Starting with the last one, of course, if you have air conditioner in the ground floor and the air is coming in with, let's say, 30 degrees and it comes out with 35, that's one thing. But if you go to the top of the high rise and they're all stacked on top of each other, you might have 60, 70 degrees air intake and then also even hotter coming out. So this is a huge difference in efficiency then on the air conditioners, and the higher you get, the more heat you will eject. And that tells us many things. We can react to that architecturally. We can try to keep the heat out of the building in the first place. That's when what Adele talked about, you know, the greening on the low buildings, or in higher buildings that they get a skin, like an additional skin that protects them from the sun and the heat coming in. So these are all options. And then it's absolutely correct. If everybody turns on the aircon at night, then even more have to turn it on, because the neighbors are also being hit by this. There is a strange phenomenon. If we look at the pure numbers that I showed in the Sankey diagrams, it seems that all the Singaporean citizens have a relatively small consumption of electricity through this type of action. But there's a lot more ejected from commercial buildings or buildings like this, because the people are normally very careful spending more money on electricity or aircon. But it can be improved by setting the levels higher. For example, we did calculations or big simulations comparing all the settings in Singapore of air conditioning in commercial buildings and in private buildings, putting the settings up to, let's say, 25 degrees. And we found that that could really, if everybody would really do that, every business would really and could really do that, that could reduce the nighttime temperature in the worst hit areas by up to 2 or even 3 degrees. So then, of course, you would need less air conditioning, then the neighbors would need less, and you could start to downturn this spiral, which is going up now all the time. So there are technical solutions and some behavioral solutions. But as Adele said, you have to be very careful. The tree is a very good example. You know, too many trees, we know, we put too many trees, air gets stuck, doesn't move, people are uncomfortable, so it's like counterproductive. That means for every building, for every park, for every courtyard, we have to be able to predict realistically what is the right mix of actions for that. And we are very confident that is possible.
Great. Thanks for sharing some of that research that's ongoing.
Can I follow up
yes,
on
please.
that quickly? Yes. When I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she asked me what's the most important invention ever invented, and I say it's always air conditioning. Yes, so just like Lee Kuan Yew once said, we worship the ground that Mr. Carrier helped to develop back in the early 19th century. And also, when I go overseas and we talk to amongst my IPCC colleagues, they always say, why can't you get rid of air conditioning, in the tropics, just like what we do in Europe or in North America, we adapt to it. And I say, you come live in Singapore for more than a year and you see whether you can live without air conditioning. But the point is, to answer the question, Gerhard has pointed out two very important things. One is trying to stop or reduce the heat load within buildings themselves, so that you reduce your energy consumption, you reduce the need for air conditioning through tweaking behavior, or by tweaking urban design and by adding in green infrastructure, for instance, to do that. But there's also one other thing that you can do to reduce, and that is when you upscale it, you consolidate your air conditioning needs through district cooling. That has already been done at the Marina Bay Sands, and also in future urban or residential projects, that will be the way to go. You can't escape, the point is you can't really escape the use of air conditioning that will lead to increased anthropogenic heat emissions, but you sure as heck can try and be more efficient and try and reduce that impact from both the heat island and reduce your emissions from carbon.
Thanks. I think there was another question that folks wanted a little bit more clarity on. I think, Adele, you started answering this relationship between greening and heat. And then also, I think someone else here is asking, in addition, how effective are green rooftop spaces in reducing UHI? So not just green by roadside, but also on the roofs. Is there actually a difference when we're looking at these types of vegetation? And open to Gerhard as well.
Probably just at several levels. At the street level, I think tree planting provides shade to people along the street. So that's a very material impact, immediate material impact. And then the trees then also shade the road surface or the pavement surface so that it doesn't absorb as much heat. So I think that's one level where it really helps. For rooftops, I think it depends what you're comparing to. So if you're comparing to a bare concrete roof, then planting on roofs should help because it reduces the amount of heat from the sun that's stored on the rooftop and then later radiated back. But if you're, so that's where that question of bare concrete roof, cool paint roof, green roof with trees or plants, or solar panels on roof, which one is the best? And that one to me is not so clear right now. In reality, we probably will do a mix of it. So right now, there's already a very active plan to put more solar panels on top of our roofs to get more renewable energy. But what does that mean? And should we put, say, planting below the solar panels on these roofs, or should it be bare concrete, or what should it be? So those are sort of fine-tuning. But the greening on roofs would not impact the people at the ground as much, I guess. But it could help with sort of the general air temperature in the city. Yeah.
Yes, if I may, that's exactly the point. It's a great idea, but it does not affect the people on the ground so much. The effect is really very local. You will see on the satellite image, yes, this roof will be cooler, yes, but it doesn't affect the people on the ground so much. We did that a lot. It was almost an obsession in Germany, in the 70s and 80s, make all the roofs green. And then eventually people started thinking, why do you put grass on the roof? The grass should be on the ground. Put something else on the roof, something more useful. And then you have these things, air conditioning. And now, of course, all the urban farming, the combination of this roof and water and perma-green on the roof and urban farming and maybe even reflective solar panels. I think the technology will make the roofs so valuable in the future, because remember, every single kilowatt hour that we can produce in the place where it is needed for cooling whatever is below is counting 2 or 3 times. It's counting at the site, and it's also counting at the power plant. And not only at the power plant, but even at the source where the natural gas comes from and transport and everything. So it's a huge gain if you can do that directly on the roof or on the facade, combined with other things. And as Adele said, it has to be almost every single building, depending where it is, on the mountain, in the shade or whatever, will have a different optimal roof in the future.
Great. So it seems now there's a lot of research ongoing. The question, I guess, is how do we make sure these findings are responsive to and connected with the government and the private sector and how they do business? And in short, how do we transform the way we do things? So for example, as you've been pointing out, it's not only the infrastructure. I think Michael mentioned there's a cultural component. Gerhard mentioned social programs or outreach efforts that we might engage in. And likewise, how do we ensure that developers and architects are aware of and willing to adopt these new practices or factor it into their design work? So I guess I'll open this up to all of the panelists to weigh in on basically how we move past business as usual to be much more climate sensitive and heat sensitive in our work. I guess for this one, maybe we could start with Yan Yan. Could you maybe give us some suggestions for how MOH and the hospital system could address this?
Yeah, This is really a difficult question, I would say. Just now there was such an exciting discussion about the roof. I was just talking to Michael about the challenges that we have in having green roof. So really we had a bit of everything, and just like what Adele said, it's really a balancing act. We talked about solar panels. We talked about putting urban farms. We're still exploring urban farms on the roof. We have our gardens on the rooftop, and in competition with all the M&E plants, of course. And when we run out of space, we start looking at whether the plants will be able to, the green will survive under the solar panel roof. So we build a secondary roof on top of the roof. And there was a lot of concerns from the clinical community that if you put soil-based planting on the rooftop and happen to be a critical clinical facilities, you actually introduce the potential of potential leakages to very critical clinical facilities. You introduce potential pests, especially in a hospital, we can't use pesticides, right, into clinical facilities. So really everything is about a balancing act. It is about will, it is about when we are spending government expenditure to build a health campus in our context. One thing that guided us throughout this journey is that how could we make the money work harder? Since we're going to spend the money, since we're going to build up the area, what could we do to actually challenge the current norm? And that's something that propelled us. Along the way, we have to give up on certain ideas, but so be it. At least we continue to propel the vision of working harder and trying to achieve a little bit more. Yeah.
And Michael, how could the architecture community address this?
So for the issue of roof garden, I think actual, tangible, quantitative kind of benefits might be quite limited at the timing. I mean, there are different schools of thought. Some say that actually you don't get real benefits. Some say that it's so minimal that it's not worth the investment. But I think there's a social aspect, there's a cultural aspect to that too, because if you start to use the roof for facilities and for spaces and for program that can start to become a bit more naturally ventilated, more about passive architecture, that actually sends a message across that look, we can be comfortable in a naturally ventilated space. We can be comfortable in a space that is ventilated by a ceiling fan, rather than it has to be an aircon space right down on the podium. It doesn't have to be that. So what we are doing right now in the hospital is to put a staff function room at the rooftop right next to the farm. So while the staff are having their function, it could be a meeting, could be a conference, could be a talk. It's right next to the volunteers harvesting the cabbage next door. And by doing that, it actually sends a message across. The message is that you can be comfortable in a passively designed architecture. So I think that message actually, even if it doesn't translate to real dollar and cents saving, it is telling people that, look, passive architecture is possible. And I think that kind of message is really powerful. And when we start to propagate that kind of message, then people start to do it and realize that, hey, we can be tropically designed in a space like this. So I think we need to find ways to change the mindset. And the mindset is about how we do not need to rely on air conditioning. It is the truth. Like for example, I have 2 kids. One of them doesn't need to sleep in the aircon room. The other one just have to have aircon because I don't know, they are made differently. But I think it's a cultural change also. If we grew up in an environment when there's no aircon, like our parents' generation, actually they don't like to sleep in the aircon at night because they never grew up with having aircon when they were young, right? So, but they have the same DNA as we do. I don't think people have evolved within such a short time, right? So, why can't we reverse that? I think there are many ways that we can look at to reverse a mindset, and that is the root cause of the problem. If you can take away that root cause, we can take away that root problem, then people do not want to have aircon. Then we can, talk about all these waste heat in a much more easily solvable way. So that's how I would see it.
So I guess that's a good segue to Winston. And since you're teaching at SMU, what do businesses find persuasive then?
Okay, so I totally agree with Michael. The social, cultural, communicative aspects are essential to try and make your urban climate sustainable. But talking to businesses, talking to SMEs, other stakeholders, the economic argument comes into play, and that's something we can't escape from. how do you incorporate sustainable design? How do you incorporate sustainable practices, not just to the ecology, but also for your economic bottom line? I don't have an answer for that. I don't pretend to have an answer for that. What I can say is that there, at least in the academy, from the place I was from in NUS, there is that increasing practice from the School of Design and Environment to have new buildings or new constructions that are, built in a sustainable way, the new SDE4 building. In my new place of employment, the entire campus plus the residences where students live in are all green mark platinum. They try to be low energy use, or the new Tahir Foundation building is built with net zero energy principles in mind. I think we have greater flexibility to actually invest, or maybe, no media here except for that recording over there. We have the leeway to spend a bit more money to show that we are serious. We practice what we preach in terms of economic sustainability. But we have that luxury, and I'm not sure that a small, medium enterprise, a landscape architect firm, or a business that wants to improve on its efficiency and try to remain sustainable for urban climate and sustainable for global climate, I'm not sure they can do that. And I don't have an answer. If my fellow panelists or if somebody from the audience has an answer, I sure as heck would like to hear from you.
Adele, yeah, please.
Maybe just to also just respond to that point. So we recognize that. So one of the focus areas say in our research, in government's research objectives, is to try to bring the cost down if possible. So if we can find these solutions which are good for the environment, but make it more cost effective, then that makes it easier for widespread adoption by businesses. The other way is scaling. So we've seen that effect for, say, solar panels worldwide, right? It used to be very expensive, but now as technology is improved and more people are installing solar panels, the price has come down significantly, such that a lot of businesses feel that it makes sense for them to do it. So these are some things that hopefully will drive the cost of some of these measures down, such that businesses themselves see that it makes sense. From government point of view, we can, of course, influence through policies. So BCA's Green Mark framework does give points for design interventions that contribute to mitigating UHI. So whether that's in terms of cool roofs, cool surfaces, or greenery, they reward that. And as we understand which strategies are the most effective, I think we will also then adjust some of these government schemes to nudge behavior in the right directions. BCA also just introduced a super low energy certification, where if buildings have 60% energy savings from BAU, they are able to get that certification. And I think that is one example where they can demonstrate that it is indeed possible to do things differently. So some examples of buildings who are sort of doing that are like the NTU campus, and I think Samwo also has a development like that. So that's that part about changing people's mindsets. We look at some of the existing buildings now, and they're a lot of glass, and you can't even open the windows if you wanted to. So hopefully with more awareness through the schools, through public education and all that, we'll start to see people's mindsets changing, clients telling the architects that this is what they'd like, right? And then hopefully the whole system works together to create a better product for our future.
So education and training, Gerhard, is that something the education sector will take on?
The educational sector sounds almost like an industry, but it should be, to increase the amount of knowledge and curiosity and critical thinking in people. I mean, that's how we see it. I know what you mean. But I was fascinated when I was just listening to Adele and also to the others. In June of this year, I was invited to the German European School to give 2 lectures in the morning at 8 o'clock. And there were 2 groups of people. In one, I should speak German, and the other one I should speak English because they were they can take English education there, and I thought, what is going on? I told them the same thing. I used the same gadgets, the heat camera and pointing it to the window and everything. And the one group was totally following, yeah, of course, this comes from this and this. I mean, they were 6-7-year-old kids, and one group was totally informed. The other group was like, whoa, doing all kinds of things they didn't understand much, I think. And it turned out that was just really, the difference was just the teacher. They had like 2 or 3 hours of this introduction before, and it was amazing how it changed their knowledge, their behavior, their mind, and everything. So, of course, yeah, this is the big thing. But we have to be very careful, I think, with changing mindsets, because that could also go in the wrong direction. All of us, coming from wherever in the world, our mind was set to certain things when we were young, and we carried us with us for a long time. I think it helps really much if all of us go into another place, another country, to see that mindset. So I was thinking when you were talking about this, how about the entire Singapore population going for 1 year to Switzerland, and the Swiss one going here, because then they could see what it means to live without air conditioning, with heat, without heat, all of this. And it's not, all the ones, of course, only those who are in this tertiary sector business, No, it's crazy. But this way, I know education has a huge impact. And sometimes I myself, who is very much into using or hoping for education to bring the possibility of science into society, I feel myself quite often at the limit, and because then I see my colleagues, my pure research colleagues, giving me critical looks, that I do not go overboard, because this should really not mix. We shouldn't over-promise things that can be done, and I think this is another important limitation of education. But in general, yes, from school on, it helps a lot.
So today, there's been some linking between urban heat island as one critical problem, but all of this taking place in the context of climate change. When we do talk about climate, though, including here in Singapore, there's sometimes a tendency to separate mitigation from adaptation as different tracks. How do we see cutting Singapore's own carbon footprint versus efforts to prepare for the impacts of climate change? So Winston, we're seeing some pretty worrying projections from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So as a lead author involved in IPCC, is it too late to take mitigation actions? What if some people say we should focus on adapting to the serious effects instead?
How much time do I have? Briefly, there's always this discourse about mitigation and adaptation, but as I tell my students, there's always a third leg to this that is not often said. It's mitigation, adaptation, and inaction. There's a relationship between all three. If you don't mitigate, don't adapt, and you don't act, you will get screwed. However, you need both. The trap in everyone's thinking is that it's either or, mitigation or adaptation, but the case is you need both. The impacts of climate change. While climate change is global in nature, the emissions are from all around the planet, and the forcings of that are global in scale. The impacts, the vulnerabilities, the risks that we face in cities are local or regional in nature, and it is best to adapt to them at that particular scale. There's various actions that people can take. You can adapt at a local or community level, as some places with very poor governance have, and it can be successful. But the best sort of adaptation policies are when all your different stakeholders, from governments to businesses to the academy to everybody else who cares about the future climate, all align yourselves in the same direction. I know it sounds a bit trite, but in terms of international meetings at the UN level or what, Singapore is used as a very positive example. People actually respect what we do in terms of how every interest is aligned in a good way to adapt to the impacts of heat, like what we're doing with Cooling Singapore in its various phases, or in how we adapt to the issues of sea level rise. But I'll be the first one to admit, the focus in Singapore is often too much into adaptation and too little is done in mitigating our carbon emissions. There's a lot of, we emit a lot. We punch above our weight in a lot of things, and we also punch above our weight in terms of how much we emit in terms of our fossil fuel emissions. Although, yes, we do use the cleanest fossil fuel to power our industries, power our homes through natural gas, it is still a greenhouse gas. We can't avoid that. There's a lot more that can be done in terms of how we can switch to renewable energies. That is a different conversation, which will take a lot of time. But there are other simple things that either individuals or governments can do to reduce your usage of certain things like air conditioning, or travel travel more by public transport, or take one less trip overseas. But there's also things that businesses can do, or individuals can do if you're privileged enough to purchase carbon offsets for your travel, or if you're in an industry that invests in, shall we say, dirty, pollutive fossil fuel industries, you can divest from that and put your money into something that will give you better long-term investment revenues, so to speak. You don't have to invest in a coal-fired plant. If you have the money, you can invest in some renewable technologies that in the long run, and I would argue also in the short run, will give you more money than putting it into another coal-fired plant.
Any response from our government representative?
Remember, the camera there is watching you.
So I agree, we do have to do both adapt and do our part in mitigation. So on the carbon emission reductions, Singapore has committed in the Paris Agreement to reducing our carbon emissions intensity by 36% from 2005 levels by 2030. That's a lot of numbers, but essentially there is a concrete commitment that we've made in the international forum, and in usual Singapore style, when we make such public commitments, we will meet them. We will do our darnest to meet them. So there is that commitment to do that, and we are looking within government to see ways to reduce our carbon footprint throughout across sectors in Singapore's activities. This year, we've also introduced a carbon tax, just baby steps in a way, but we're making moves in that direction. So that's broadly on the carbon mitigations. I would add that a large portion of that work would be in terms of energy efficiency. Like I said, at all levels, so manufacturing processes down to daily activities, down to, say, transport systems and so on. So hopefully from this range of efforts at the system level, we will be able to meet our commitments and beyond. So at the adaptation level, we are also working on it within government to deal with it at various levels. So there's the threat of sea level rise. So we're looking at coastal protection measures. We've been progressively increasing our reclamation platform levels for the new land that we do create, or even raising road levels to deal with anticipated sea level rise. We're also planning for flood and drainage systems to deal with more intense rainfalls. So what does that mean? Do we have to widen all our drains, or do we build sort of detention tanks? Where do we put them? How do we deal with these very intense rainfalls, but may only happen once in a while? So do you build all this infrastructure up front and then have them sort of sitting empty all the time, or do you find ways to design them into the city so that they serve various functions? But when it's raining, there's a way to deal with the sudden deluge of water. So these are things that we are actively looking at amongst the agencies. We also look at sort of second degree aspects, so things like water supply is another issue. So other than major rainfalls, intense rainfalls, you may also have drought. So of course we're also looking actively at how to improve our water supply resilience for Singapore, whether that's through desalination plants or increasing our catchment. Other secondary impacts that we're looking at as well as, for example, improving our food security. So you would also have heard of the 30% local food by 2030 goal. And that is partly a response to the potential risk of food shortages worldwide. So how do we have a better handle of our own food supplies within Singapore? So these are some of the things that we're working on. As Winston mentioned, we don't have a lot of renewable energy options. So that's kind of why we still bring in, most of our energy is still from natural gas, but we're doing a lot in terms of trying to build up the solar energy source for Singapore, be it on rooftops or on reservoirs or offshore. So these are some of the ways that we are trying to put in policies and strategies to better deal with climate change, both at the adaptation as well as the mitigation levels.
Thanks. Let's turn back to some of the more questions from the audience. I think the first couple are linked. So one is a question about Singapore's population and kind of climate change impacts. But I think it's linked to the second one, which is, are high-rise apartments climate friendly based on research, or do we need to look into redesigning the way we live? Maybe that also includes, the glass skyscrapers. Maybe we'll give this one to Michael as a designer, thinking about how we redesign the way we live.
High-rise HDB apartments, are they climate friendly? Okay. So I think first off, it's probably not something that we can just wish away. As much as we like, we are very land scarce. But I think being the third densest city in the world, I think that's the last ranking that we have. We still have about 40% greenery just looking from the satellite, as a proportion of the overall land area. That to me is an amazing fact. I think NParks has done a wonderful miracle in allowing us to have about 40% of greenery even in a land that is so scarce. And I think this question and that kind of situation goes hand in hand. If we are not able to make a very hard decision on day one that we're going to have high density, intense developments to really put people where they should be so that we can safeguard the rest of the island in order for everybody to enjoy when they should be enjoying, then we're going to have urban sprawl that spreads across the entire island. Yes, you may get a lot of low-rise developments, very wonderful houses, but what does that mean from the big picture? It means that all of us are going to be trapped in our houses where we have no parks to go to. We're going to be in build-up developments where we have no open spaces to enjoy. So I don't think this is a question that should be addressed just at the level of the question. Yes, if you are really looking at just within the unit itself, we may be saying that it's not the best environment to be staying. Where is my front yard? Where's my garden? We don't have that. But I think we should be looking at it from the entire city's point of view. That there are options that we can go out to. And just looking at the situation in Hong Kong and many places that have a lot smaller housing units that compared to what we have now, I really count my blessings. I think in Singapore, urban public housing, when we have visitors coming to Singapore, they will always be at awe and say, "This is public housing." And it's just, I had a German professor when I was in school, and he came to Singapore for a visit and said, "It's incredible, you come down, you alight at the airport, the train takes you to wherever you are, You go into this place and then it's all greenery and everything works in Singapore. So, I mean, of course, you know, I didn't tell you the things that don't work, but it's really relative to many places around the world that we have really done a lot. Public housing definitely is one of those things that gives a lot of social stability. It gives a lot of people a sense of belonging to what they have. But I think we do just have to look at all the other things around public housing that is, you know, part of the big picture. And because of that, I think there's really a lot more options to live, a lot more ways to play, to work, and I think that's really what you know, we should be building up instead of looking at, you know, just one particular aspect.
So I think
Maybe I just
go ahead.
quickly add on that, but I think the other key characteristic of the HDB is that they still fundamentally design flats to be naturally ventilated. So in the context of today's discussion on UHI, I think that's a huge plus and so on. But I think for HDB, they're very mindful that not everyone, they want to try to make sure that the original design is something that's livable with natural ventilation. If people decide to install air conditioning because, you know, preferences and so on, and we're seeing that over time, that's social and cultural, but at least at the basic design, that's something they think about. And they actively look at that through, like I mentioned, modeling the microclimate for the area, thinking about building orientation to try to minimize the heat from the environment. Yeah.
So just to corroborate on that, so we do both public housing and private housing, and I've done a recent research on a comparison between the two. Average room sizes between a public housing room, bedroom to bedroom, and master bedroom to master bedroom. Public housing is still easily about 10 to 20% larger.
So I think
This
the next
affect-
question from the audience is more of a political economy spin on these issues. These three top voted questions seem to be pretty linked. So one is, what is the current degree of political support on climate change initiatives? And then at the same time, the question of justice, right? How do we address inequality and access to cooling technology, since this technology is going to cost money? And then it seems people are quite interested in the question, which they've called the elephant in the room, Singapore's oil and gas industry and Jurong Island. So maybe to Winston and Gerhard for this one.
You want to go first?
You test. I will be very clear. You go on.
Where do I begin first? Political support depends on where you are. We know that certain governments are against the implications of what the IPCC have found over the past 30 years. You can probably know who they are. Then again, there are other governments from particularly small island states, which are among the most vulnerable on the planet, that demand action. And it's more of a, so there's strong political support there. Politics can only go so far. Politics can only go so far in terms of what changing this political support requires democratic action. If people in these countries have the interests of the future generations or the environment in mind, then the needle will switch towards political support towards doing something about climate change. For inequalities, being not from the government, I think I have leeway to say that to address these sort of inequalities, there has to be acknowledgement that these inequalities exist, and there has to be some level of state-sponsored ways of addressing these inequalities through potentially subsidies, for instance. Maybe Adele can mention something about that. She's nodding her head, but I don't want to put her on the spot. The elephant in the room. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer that? Or do you have an opinion on that, Gerhard?
Not an opinion, just facts, but go ahead.
Yes. It's a very tricky thing, because when one mentions that Jurong Island is a hotbed of emissions, a hotbed of oil, the oil refinery and the petrochemical industry there, it's a massive emitter of greenhouse gases. You can't avoid that. It's very simple to say, let's kick them out. It's very simple to say, let's remove all their subsidies. It's very simple to say, they are the evil polluters. They are responsible for climate change. Get rid of them. But that's it's probably ethically perhaps the right thing to do. If you subscribe to what Greta Thunberg's vision is, if you subscribe to the sort of extinction rebellion movements that have precipitated so far in the West, if you speak to scientists, they might not be so explicit in saying that, but they do see why there has to be a redress in terms of fairness of what the fossil fuel industry has done over the past 30, 40 years. Yes, that's the hashtag Exxon knew, Shell knew about the consequences of climate warming from their own internal studies. But in real life, it's not that simple. It definitely isn't that simple. You can't just kick them all out and have something else put into their place. You can't have that done by diktat. I am of the opinion that, and this is me sticking my neck out, you have to get them on board in terms of having their own alignment towards doing something on climate change. Baby steps are needed, perhaps. There's always that criticism that whatever industries do, fossil fuel industries do, can be corporate greenwashing. I can see that to a certain level. But they are taking steps towards increasing their research and their development towards renewable energies. It is to their interest, it is to their bottom line, because if they don't do it, other companies will. And as an economic entity, as a private sector entity, it is to their benefit, it is to their long-term survival in order to get on board the sustainability train. Now, we can probably talk about this privately, and I have my own views, which I'll say in private, but it is important not to push them out of this discussion. They want to contribute as well. It is to their interests.
Thank you. And I just want to start maybe with the first one. This is very easy. At this point, I want to acknowledge my colleagues again. I know no other country which makes it possible that really not only working together with the government agencies, but with all these colleagues in Singapore, Cooling Singapore 2.0, we have our abbreviations again from Berkeley, from of course from Cambridge, but then also from Singapore itself, you know, from NUS, NTU, SUTD, SMU, but also from MIT, TU Munich, ETH. So they will all be working together on this. So the support is really there. I really appreciate that, and I tell that to everybody. The second point is very, very, very important, because it shows it is really, we can see in every place, in every city, where this temperature spread is getting bigger. Also, the inequality is getting bigger. So the temperature is just a good indicator for more inclusion and more equality. I think this is very, very clearly formulated here. And therefore, our main goal is to bring this temperature down. It's just an indicator, because if we manage to bring the temperature down, we only can do that together with the elephant in the right side, because if we work together with them step by step, bringing temperature down will mean air is getting cleaner, noise is getting less, and also the outdoor thermal comfort is rising, health costs are going down, and I think this is the most inclusive action that we can do. So for us, this group that we try to do that from science, it's a little bit like a moon landing together with all the government agencies, but I think it's a very good goal, and it will be even more sustainable than the moon landing.
Okay, so maybe I'll just add on that. Thank you. But having said that, I think the government wants to work with the industry and is working with the industry partners to find ways to make the industry cleaner, more friendly to the climate. So we're exploring, for example, lower carbon products, more innovative technologies and solutions that will help to push some of these efforts towards being more climate friendly. So it's along the lines as what Winston and Gerhard have talked about. I think it's important that we work with them. They are potentially a very important part of the solution as well as we go forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Adele. So we've had a very lively exchange here. Lots of ideas circulating around about how we study urban heat island, devise new solutions, and implement them in Singapore. I think, Gerhard, you mentioned that looking ahead, we actually have Cooling Singapore 2.0. So just to close then, we'd like to ask the panelists to weigh in, 10 seconds or less per person. For the future version of Cooling Singapore, what are the unanswered questions that you have that you wish the research community could tackle? So why don't we just start at the end with Michael and just run down the line.
How do we help people to use PMDs more responsibly? No, I seriously, but I think there are many alternative ways of transport that is really coming up. Obviously, the fact that it's creating so much problem, points to the fact that it's very well used. These are teething problems that needs to be fixed, obviously. But I think it is a very positive sign at the macro scale. It means that these are actually starting to replace vehicles, cars, and things that are a lot more damaging to the environment. So how do we plug this low-hanging fruit? Is there a way that we can make it a lot more conducive for people to use cycling, to bicycles, PMDs, all the alternatives that are a lot more environmentally friendly? And I think it's possible because, if any country can do this kind of thing, Singapore can. So I think we are already having a culture that is burgeoning. People are already using that quite extensively. So how do we actually just capitalize on that and let people find a reason not to own a car? So that would be my question.
Thanks. Yan Yan, what's on your wish list?
There's a fair bit amount of research on salutogenic design for health, design for wellness. In the tropical weather, how could we actually link that with urban heat island, the cooling effect on healing? Yeah.
Great. Thanks for being brief.
Yeah, I think for us, having gone through the earlier stages of the Cooling Singapore projects, there's all these 86 strategies, right? So the question for us is, which of these should we put together, and how do we integrate them together in the city to have the best outcome for Singapore with the least cost, if possible? Yeah.
Just two things to say. One is, in order for Cooling Singapore or for climate change mitigation to work, we need to be consultative. We need to talk, we need to engage and communicate. I would say figuratively, our doors are open to stakeholders like yourselves for Cooling Singapore, but also for climate change emissions. I've just been reminded that there is a consultation exercise that you can contribute to Singapore's climate emissions profile by the year 2050. If you go to the REACH website, reach.gov.sg, it's open until the end of August, and all your contributions, doesn't matter if you're industry, if you're a student, if you're a retiree, you can give your input into formulating policy into reducing our carbon emissions. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, thank you so much for staying here during the start of the long weekend. I wish everybody a happy National Day, happy Hari Raya Haji, and I'll pass the mic over to Gerhard.
Thank you. I'm very happy about these questions or these demands that you have. Thank you very much. And I learned something from Michael and from Yan Yan. And my goal would be really to take what you said, healing and engaging and activating in your processes. I just would turn it around a little bit. Engaging first, that's what you're doing here. That's what we have to do definitely collectively in the next phase of Cooling Singapore 2. Then healing. Second, we really have to heal the environment. I mean, the ecosystem services of Singapore, we must not destroy them. In some parts, we really have to heal them. And the third one is really to activate. And this is great. The new technology is coming, but also the new thinking is coming, making it more fashionable to do this kind of work, to move towards a cooler Singapore as an indicator for all the other good things. So I thank you very much for this input. And these questions are really fantastic that you put there. I hope I can have them.
Yeah. So thank you to all of our panelists today for this really vibrant discussion. I really love, for instance, finding out that young people have a much higher willingness to pay for mitigation, or that old people feel like they don't need as much aircon when they sleep. Also, I like the point that if we plan early enough, it's possible. It's not always about cost. And that the panelists also emphasize that it's not just about infrastructure, but all of these social and human aspects that really matter as well. If you enjoyed today's session, we have another highly relevant panel coming up in our CLC lecture series.